consumer applications, the fact that you'll be able to download a movie more quickly and things like that. But this is a rare opportunity here at the T2 conference, Teneo and Global Citizen partnering, and a lot of CEOs in attendance. And I'm very happy to have Ginny Rometty, the CEO of IBM, Steve Mollenkopf, CEO of Qualcomm, and Hans Vestberg, the CEO of Verizon, all with me today to talk about, broadly speaking, 5G. Thank you all for taking some time. Yep. We talk often about the consumer applications. It's not unimportant, of course, certainly not for your business. But Steve, I'll go back to you and I, and I'll start with you because you and I began talking about, frankly, the enterprise opportunity for what 5G meant years ago. You were talking to me about it. It was at the time when you were actually, before you even tried to buy NXP. I won't bring that up more than that. But the opportunity in terms of the Internet of Things, in terms of how many chips were going to be in different things, for lack of a better term, and what it meant for the another industrial revolution. So let's start there. Where are we on that timeline, as opposed to Hans, who keeps rolling out new cities with, or regions with 5G? Where are we on the industrial timeline for the applications of 5G?
Sure. So if you look at the industrial timeline, it really comes in a second wave. The first wave, you're getting the so-called more G phase of cellular, but the real exciting part is, and the part with the huge economic potential, is the Internet of Things, or really digitization. Every major industry is trying to figure out how do they deal with the data and the digitization of their infrastructure, their products, their customer data. Increasingly, more and more of that is wireless, or is connected wirelessly. And if you look at the economic benefit, we did a study, or commissioned a study, and I think it was something like 12-point-something trillion worth of economic value by 2035 will be enabled by 5G. The majority of that will be outside of the cellular space. What you're seeing is a change in technology, not unlike electricity or coming into factories. The change in the way industry will work and the way infrastructure will be controlled will be dramatic. And that's why you see governments so interested in this transition.
And I want to talk a bit about that as well. But give me an example. Give our viewers a hard world example, even if it is a number of years away, as to what you're talking about when you talk about that transition.
Well, you're going to see connected healthcare, for example. The delivery of healthcare in the United States, which is a large percentage of the GDP, it's high to mid-teens worth of the GDP. A small improvement in the delivery of that healthcare, just the monitoring of people and how you impact their lives, tremendous economic benefit and tremendous benefit to people. And it's because you can connect people and you really get the telematics off of how they're living, and you can control the outcomes for health much better. Same thing happens in transportation, same thing happens in education, and then on top of that, just how do I deal with the impact of the cloud to business, which I have some great colleagues here who know better than I do, but that's all enabled by the 5G revolution.
Right, and we're going to talk a bit about the cloud and what it's going to enable in terms of the lack of latency and the edge. But Hans, how important is this longer term for Verizon? When you show up with us on air, or you do an analyst meeting or a quarterly call, most of the questions are not about this opportunity as much as they are about, okay, is Apple going to have a phone, and when are you rolling out in this area, and will millimeter wave spectrum work? So what about this larger opportunity?
I go back a little bit, because when the design principles was done on 5G, which was a lot of discussion, remember 2G to 4G was only two capabilities, throughput and speed, better from 2G to 3G to 3G to 4G. When 5G was designed, the whole idea was actually to how can you enable enterprise and society, as Steven said. And much of it became 8 capabilities. I mean, enormous and low latency, battery lifetime, enormous throughput, securer transactions on the network, and of course much of that was designed for enterprises. And today we are spending a lot of time on that. I usually talk about that we have 4 business cases on 5G, which is unheard of. One is mobility. That's what we're building out in the cities in the US right now. The other is 5G home. We do broadband to the home with 5G instead. And the third one is clearly mobile edge compute, where we bring 5G to the edge for enterprises. And the fourth one is cost. It's always cheaper to transport data in a next generation network. When we talk about 5G mobile edge compute, that's the third launch we have. We have launched home, we have launched mobility, and we're launching 5G mobile edge compute in this year, in the fourth quarter.
In the fourth quarter of 2019.
Yes, that we committed already earlier. So the first mobile edge compute centers based on 5G will be this year. So we're going to have customers using it. Then, of course, we're bringing it further out. And, of course, the customers that we heard Steven talk about, it's a lot about how do you transform a factory having it all 5G? How do you do a warehousing being with 5G with all this ubiquitous coverage and speed and throughput and latency? So I spend a lot of time with all the large enterprise to understand the platform, and then of course with partners like IBM, etc., how they come in with their softwares, because it's going to be a combination of it all in order to deliver a service.
Right, and I think a lot of people are trying to understand the different responsibilities and or opportunities. Ginny, let me come to you, because I mean the last time we spoke on air, I think was in mid-July, and you had announced your the AT&T, or it may have been the Red Hat closed, but it was around the announcement of the AT&T strategic alliance, multi-year alliance. You said at the time in the press release as well that 5G enterprises will one day be able to rapidly transmit data to and from multiple clouds and billions of edge devices with increased reliability and security, reduced latency, as Hans just indicated, and eventually this will help businesses transform the user experience, optimize processes across industries from retail to financial services, transportation, manufacturing. What does that actually mean?
So with my colleagues here and the work we've done with Hans as well, if you're a company, this actually does, by the way, open up two big markets for IBM I'll come back to, but just the enterprises I deal with, it's the convergence of a couple things they've talked about. The 5G, which everybody just thinks big bandwidth, low latency, real quick, but you also have two other things happening at the same time. Networks, like Hans, are cloudifying, if I can use that word, cloudification, so that they can quickly put software-defined services up fast. And the third thing he mentioned, which was this edge computing. So what does that mean to a company? It means that I could almost do real-time analytics anywhere. So I actually believe with 5G, the biggest impact will probably be, I think we all agree, enterprise first. Yeah. And even in an enterprise, in some cases it may likely be what I call fixed campus, kind of in a perimeter. It'll be the easiest way. And to me, some real quick examples of things we are already working on. So as an example, Steve mentioned healthcare. My mom was recently in a hospital. I spent a week coordinating moving big files from each healthcare provider. Or you go to a remote surgery. Internet 4.0, picture walk in a factory and it's wireless. Think of all the wires, the cables, and what it could mean to safety and maintenance. That's one that they're working on. A retail store. Okay, if I could really look at all that video real time, I could stock shelves differently. If I am a car to car, for safety reasons, the two cars are communicating. That's another one we're working on. The other one would be if you think about first responders. We're working on one with drones and with what would you do with wildfires? Is airports, it's security. So I actually see those use cases everybody's working on right now. And the two, if I can just throw in the two big spots for us, one is, as Hans said, these networks, part of it is they have to cloudify. His networks will cloudify. He's working on that.
Absolutely. Explain what that means, what cloudifying means.
Well, you go.
Okay, I'll give you my simple, but he's an expert on obviously their own networks. But every network is becoming software defined. So instead of being really hardware with its own specialized software, difficult to change, they're going to make it like a cloud and that they can put up new services very easily. I think that's kind of an easy thing to understand. But networks are things that have to be really reliable. Yeah. So big opportunity for us. We've never been a network provider. But with Red Hat, they're in 120 of the telcos around the world, so we're the basis to begin to be the cloudification of that network.
Right.
And then the second one is, and this is really how Hans and I were doing a lot of work, is those enterprises. He'll need systems integrators to come help build those new, these are really brand new applications that are out there, right? So on one hand, he'll get productivity in a network. I think for parts of the cloudification, it could be 50, 70% productivity. You have
No, I have No, you explain it very well, Ginny. I mean, I think that it's very simple. You disconnect the hardware and the software, and suddenly you can do things we have never done in the network before. We have been on that journey now for many years with our intelligent edge network. So, and that is enabling the 5G later on, because you need to have it disconnected in order to have a chance to actually have the reliancy, the security, and all this latency and speed and throughput. So, yes.
Steve, you've been sitting here sort of silently listening. Does it all make sense to you?
It does. I think what's interesting is there are several $100 billion companies that essentially work in the hybrid cloud. And you should think of that as the first step toward the real dream, which is how do I get the computing and the data close together so I can make real-time decisions. The economic value that will come out of that, the business model evolution, the way in which the winners and losers, really a lot of winners we think, will develop, it'll be tremendous.
So how does that actually happen? I mean, we're talking about moving the computing power from where it is right now to the edge of the network, right?
Well, but I'll tell you what's interesting is the trend is undeniable. I mean, the number of meetings that you can have, places like this, just everybody's interested in doing it. Now, we've been in this industry, I've been in this industry for 3 generations of cellular. This is the one that has the easiest sell with enterprise because they all realize the strength of it. So the point now is, how do we get the technology at scale? How do we get partnerships across companies? Because really no one company can do this. And so that's what you're seeing a lot of excitement and energy about right now.
Just to hop on to Steve's point on market size, hybrid cloud's market is about a 1.2 trillion. And interestingly of it, 50% is services, as what we just talked about. And then new markets, like what we just talked about, in my mind, to cloudify these networks, to us, that's a $50 billion new market that's out there. So this is a lot of new creation, not necessarily, and there'll be some obviously cannibalization that's out there, but there are actually, David, new markets to be formed. And I think hybrid cloud's it, because you're going to connect things across all different points of where the data happens to be, and so much isn't done today because of latency. Yeah. Because if you're doing a remote surgery, I mean, you can't have it pause, right? So this latency, Hans, what is the latency? What could you expect?
We're planning to go down to 15 milliseconds, basically on latency, and you would have on a 4G network maybe 100 at best. So it's dramatic change, and I think that I agree with both of them. We don't understand, or I think we understand, this transformation, this G is much broader than the previous Gs. And when I talk to enterprises, they see it and they understand it.
They do, they get it?
Yeah. But they also have infrastructure already, so they need to do a migration. It's not like changing a smartphone here. You need to change a lot of other stuff. So that's why we have said, and just to give you an indication, we have said that significant revenues for us is 2022, but the work is happening now. That's why we launched 5G mobile edge compute right now. That's why we talk to all the partners. That's why we talk to enterprises right now, because this is a transformation of size for a factory, for a warehouse, for a retail store, or for a private 5G network for a hospital. All of that is transformation that needs to take place and planned with technology, service, integration, and all of that.
So, Steve, how much time do you spend with enterprises? I mean, we've talked a lot about, obviously, IP at Qualcomm and how it figures prominently into the business overall. Are you there already? Are there things that have yet to come that you're going to be asked to create, essentially, in terms of the ability of your chipsets and your IP to accomplish?
The reality is we have been spending a lot of time. If you look at, and it starts really with what we put in the standards bodies to enable this from a technology point of view. We did that 5 years ago. We actually did that in previous lives with Hans. But in addition, there's a reason why we have an enterprise Wi-Fi business, and a strong one, is because we know that those worlds will collide. And we think that's a very big opportunity. So we've assembled assets, partnerships, and technology to really enable this. And that's consistent with what we've done in the history of the companies. Bet on things 10 years before they happen, but we definitely have a lot of conviction that this trend is an attractive one.
Well, Ginny, a significant trend like this that we're sort of trying to flesh out here also creates both opportunity, but also can create danger to a certain extent. Markets can change dramatically. How do you think about it when you potentially are going up against the likes of Microsoft and AWS, who may also choose to move closer to the edge and offer many of those same services?
Yeah, actually I view it very different. I view this as pure opportunity to us.
You do.
Because with Red Hat already in 120 telcos and operators of the world, as a base, you actually need an open source foundation. I think Hans does too, you need some sort of open foundation here out in the network. And then to Steve's point, it's hybrid cloud, so the network's got to connect to a lot of other things. So this really does give them the basis to have an open, because you want all this innovation to come in. This is not about one company providing all the answers. If he has a software-defined network, cloudify it, you're going to want to bring in innovation from lots of places, but you need a base underneath that, which Red Hat already has a foundation for. And so it's really something to build on that is very different. So that's pure opportunity. For us, like I said, a $50 billion segment over the years to come. But the other part, I think both my colleagues said it well, what we're doing with the enterprises now, this is all reimagination of work. So this is all brand new kind of work. You're not cannibalizing. So really the goal there is to get in with design wins with clients in early experimentation, and then they will have to traverse their current operations to the new, which is what comes back into a hybrid cloud, so that you can decide to run your work wherever you need to run it when you're ready. And when I'm ready to go to the edge, I can. Because, David, I can't like overestimate enough. It's 5G technology. It's also the cloudification of the network. And the third element is edge computing. So it's the convergence of these three that make it so different for an enterprise. And I think, guys, I think we do all agree that in the enterprise, perhaps some of the first use cases we see that we're all working on are what I would call, I'm calling them fixed perimeter, meaning go to a factory, make it wireless, right? Do you realize that what that would mean to a factory, the flexibility or predictive maintenance?
So what's that going to look like, Hans?
No, it's going to be initially it is a private 5G network for a factory. We build the mobile edge compute for the factory, and then the factory needs some application and softwares on top of it, which we probably don't have, and then you put that on top in edge, and then you compute and storage everything in the factory, so you can take quicker decisions, you can reconfigure all your robotics in the factory, etc. So that's the first use, or a campus that has a 5G private network. So that's the first use cases where many of the enterprises immediately say, this we can do. But I want to come back to what Steve said as well about are you ready? I mean, if you build according to the standard, which not everyone will do, I claim that Verizon will do, then of course these capabilities will come out. And the reason I say not everyone will do is if you only have a consumer business, you might not build all the 8 capabilities. Verizon, we have all the customers, all the way from government, IoT, small and large, super big enterprises, consumer. So that's why we build it, because we're going to serve all the customer base. So it's not clear how everyone's going to do. But in our case, we believe in the all 8 currencies going to be extremely important for our customer base to transform. And that goes for consumer as well, because they're going to get benefits for sure.
Without a doubt. One can understand, having listened to this conversation, why it's got implications beyond just what it means for the enterprise, but for the national interest. And it certainly is an important dialogue going on right now in terms of us versus China. Hans, I'd like you to respond. The Pentagon's Defense Innovation Board released a report this year that said carriers to date have not demonstrated deployment capability that would deliver high speeds to large parts of the U.S. population. And the Defense Innovation Board went on to say the country that owns 5G will own future innovations. And right now, with our policies, that country is currently not likely to be the United States. Do you agree with that?
I think that in general, remember what I said, we're now building a standard, and the standard is based on all the patents from all the players in the industry, and then equipment and whatever is built on top of that. So that's, of course, a very unique way of the telecom industry. You share patents between competitors, and then you build a standard. It's the reason why your 4G phone is working in any country in the world. And Steve can say that because you are part of that industry. So of course, then after that, that's when you win the game. How you build it, how you create
So we shouldn't be judging at this point? It's too early to say that we're...
To be honest, the first commercial 5G home in the world was Verizon. The first 5G network with smartphone was Verizon in the world. So if that is an indication where we are, I think we're doing pretty well. But the next step with enterprise is going to be very important for how we use 5G and how we transform.
Well, this is going to be an extraordinarily important part of our GDP eventually, it would seem. I mean, Steve, we talk, you know the Chinese fairly well. You do a lot of business there. Are they ahead of us?
You know, it's they're going at it with a lot of intensity. What is different this time around is the speed to which the Chinese are deploying relative to the leadership that may be established other places. For example, traditionally in cellular, it would launch in Verizon or maybe Japan, and then it might be several years before you get a tremendous amount of intensity with deployment in China. Not the case this time. You're seeing a lot of deployment intensity early on. Now, of course, it's always a little bit more opaque as to what exactly is going on, but I can tell you there's a lot of intensity, and the delay between those 2 milestones very short this time. And I think that's just an indication of how important the technology is.
Are we going to be capable of keeping up with, if not exceeding, their ability to deploy, given, as you point out, they sort of have more of a command control economy than we do, and the ability to obviously order things to happen that here have to go by the rule of law?
Well, I do know that there's a lot of activity occurring in the United States. not only by Hans, but other players. A lot of activity happening in Europe. A lot of activity already happened in Korea and happening in Japan. Japan actually launched this week or last week with the Rugby World Cup. So it's just tremendous amount of activity, much more concentrated in time than what we've seen in other.
Do we have the ability, I mean, without using, sorry.
Well, no, I was just going to add, you can measure one element of success by how fast does 5G roll out, but to get the real benefit, the reason I'm the third partner in this is that as all of these providers have all realized, you've got to then put it to work, and it's going to go to work, and that means the companies have to innovate. And so I see the most activity going on companies trying to think about how to change what they do in the United States. Okay, so in the United States and in Europe is where I see a majority of that focus, David. So I think asking about deployment is very important, and it is one piece, but then you have to use it to get the benefit of innovation. And so I think there's two sides of that coin that'll, in the end, determine the winner.
And Hans, the inability to use anything from Huawei, does that in any way hobble us in terms of the ability to deploy in a rapid fashion?
Apparently not, as we were first in the world. No, we are not using Huawei, we're using
you're not.
Providers from Europe and actually Asia as well, from Korea, and it's working very nice. So, of course, we're taking the brunt with some other leading companies in the world, taking technology first. But I think that the US companies are prepared for that. I mean, Verizon is prepared to work with the infrastructure players to go there. So no, we feel really good about our base of supply chain to build the network.
Steve, you agree?
I do. I think we probably have a broader footprint, so we see it, worldwide.
Yes.
It's very global business, and it will be for a long time. I mean, for decades, it will continue to be a global business.
You three stay right there. We're going to send it back to Morgan in the studio, but we're going to continue streaming this interview on CNBC.com if you're enjoying it, which I hope you are. But for now, I'll send it back to you, Morgan. Sure thing. We're still going. So to move on a bit here, security. And I wonder, Ginny, it's an important component, obviously, of what IBM is offering to your clients. How should we be thinking about in this emerging world whether these networks, where security would seem to me to be paramount, will operate?
Yeah, look, I think it is the number one question, and it's one of the things that all the providers are, I would say, right up at the top, number one, focused on. And there are ways to secure these technologies. So I do think you ought to think of this as, yes, that ought to be a number one question, but when, Hans, you talked about the 8 capabilities and the like, a lot of that has to do with security. And it is also why, if I might opine a bit on that industry, why the networks haven't changed much. Because once you build security in, you really are hesitant to change things that could, and gosh, our networks are the most secure in the world. So, but this now enters a different way to do security, and that is why the importance for someone like us is to get in with all of these providers on these design wins, because these will really go through hardening and testing before they'll ever deploy these things out into their networks. And so, yes, it's number one. It's why I think, Hans, you used some dates about when you'll see the value, the money. All of us, this is our investment in the years to come because of things like security that we've really got to get bedded down. You talk about doing remote surgery on someone's heart. You can't talk about that without having security. You talk car-to-car communication. You can't talk about that. I mean, that's a bit of what slows down some of, as well, autonomous driving as the like, right? And I want to enter in some other technologies like blockchain. Those are some ways to secure, because so much is now going to go over the air. So did what happen on one end exactly what happens on the other end? And so I think, yes, it is the number one issue, but I also believe it's very constructively being worked on.
I think maybe put it in two sections. First of all, the standard itself. This is the most secure version of the standard we've ever seen. And I can tell you, we participated heavily in the security architecture, and it had to be in there because the use cases are so dependent on security, reliability, and all of these things. Jenny mentioned a number of them. So that's one. Then the question is the equipment secure? Is the supply chain secure that produces those standards? A lot of debate about that today. And I think the ability for companies to demonstrate that will be a real differentiator moving forward. And you have a lot of debate that, but just
How do you demonstrate that? You can't do it in a real world example, can you? I mean, how are we actually going to know?
Well, I mean, you have solutions.
You do a lot
to
of
it.
tests, right?
But other times, exactly. In other industries, they've had to do similar things, prove that things are reliable.
Provenance, prove it all the way through.
Yeah. Hans, how do you think about this issue?
No, first of all, I agree with both Steve and Ginny. The standard is more secure than the previous standard because that was part of it. If you build a new G for enterprise and society, it has to have a totally different security.
But we're going to have so much more reliant on these networks than we have in the past.
I mean, think about this. In 4G, you can cover roughly, at the best case, 50,000 devices per 1 square kilometers. In 5G, the standard goes up to 1 million. If you have 1 million devices on a square kilometer, you just need to think about how you secure all those devices. So that was definitely designed because it's not going to be 1 million people on 1 square kilometer. It was a lot of other devices. So all that is important, and you're right. I mean, the resilience and the security on the network just continues to go up as you and I use it every day, and we rely on it. But to be honest, we expect that enterprises will use it, and they're going to rely on it. So it has to be resilient, has to be redundant, has to be secure. And I think that's what my team and engineers are working on every day. And that's why we probably have been a little bit slow as well, because we don't want to change too much. Now we are in a step change because we need to virtualize the network, which we have done the last 4 or 5 years, and actually virtualize everything we have. Disconnect the hardware and software in order to do what we're doing. And but it's a tedious process, and you need to be extremely executable in that process. And I think that the US carriers, and I'm talking in general here, has been really good at that, and we will continue to have that torch going forward in 5G.
You said you wanted to talk enterprise, and there's an interesting difference because when you think consumer, it is a different set of end applications. And typically on this topic, when people think consumer, they think immersive gaming, right? Yes. Those kinds of things that'll happen.
Mixed reality.
Mixed reality. Okay, game starts, stops, doesn't matter, etc. But now, what both of my colleagues are saying, it's really machine to machine is a lot of what we're talking about here in the communication. And IDC sort of projects it'll be 30 billion devices talking to each other in the next couple years alone. So now all of a sudden we're into the world. That's why when Steve looked at me and said, well, you do that security, we're used to this machine to machine. So now it takes everything we knew about sort of centralized way down to this micro level of machine to machine on how to do and secure those devices. So it's the number one issue. It comes from a different paradigm though, right? About how you have to secure how we secure an enterprise today, you're securing that machine to machine that's out there. And the other point Steve made was provenance, right? How can I prove every part of the supply chain that was authentic at each piece? And I'll again state, I do think blockchain is going to do it. It's what we're doing. Blockchain, you and I don't know if you were in the session I attended here today on food trust and on food safety. And that now all the big suppliers that we can prove from farm to table that all leafy greens are secure, and that if there's a recall, I can tell you the row that plant came out of. But that's provenance, and the same applies to like any supply chain. Where did every piece come from? Is it in the right spot?
Right. And Steve, sort of to wrap up here to some extent, I mean, the opportunity obviously seems very, very large, but also seems years away to a certain extent when it comes to the enterprise. I would assume, though, that there are things that we're incapable of even thinking about that conceivably will occur. I mean, frankly, 15 years ago, nobody would have thought there was something like an Uber on 4G, which it was obviously enabled. Is that a fair assumption?
I'd say fair and the exciting part of it.
Exactly.
I mean, if you look, the most interesting things that have happened in cellular were not dreamed up by the people that created the fundamental technology for it. And today, we have such a wide funnel, the amount of business model evolution, if we can get this to scale and get it delivered, it'll be significant. But don't forget, I mean, 5G is happening now in terms of, I know Hans put out a revenue number, but I think the impact is going to be much quicker, certainly on the cellular side for many of us, but then followed by another wave, which a huge, I think, opportunity, and it's going to be a very exciting time.
Yeah, well, it's something that certainly our audience is going to want to follow closely, which is why I was so happy to have this opportunity to talk to all of you about it. We'll get back to talking about your latest city that you're lit up, and
like New York today,
and when Apple will have a phone out and everything else. But I certainly appreciate your willingness to take some time on this broader topic. Thank you.
Thanks.
Ginny Rometty, Steve Mollenkopf, Hans Vestberg.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you for watching.
Oh, attached.
Tethered here, so it's